Honourable members, the following ministers have given notice to make ministerial statements under Standing Orders 40. 1. Attorney General and Minister for Economy, Civil Service and Communications, and 2. Minister for Education, Heritage and Arts. Honourable members, the ministers may speak for up to 20 minutes. After the minister, I will then invite the leader of the opposition or his designate to speak on the statement for no more than 5 minutes. There will also be a response from the leader of the NFP or his designate to also speak for 5 minutes. There will be no other debate. Honourable members, I now call on the Attorney General and Minister for the Economy, Civil Service and Communications, the Honourable Aiyaz Sayed-Khaiyum, to deliver his statement. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to make a ministerial statement on the financial position of our national carrier, Fiji Airways, given the devastating impact of the global COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, sir, please let me begin with a badly needed reality check. We are living through the worst crisis in the aviation sector since the start of commercial air travel. Every airline on earth is teetering at the cliff's edge. Jobs are being cut by the thousands, by the tens of thousands, I should say. Governments are stepping in to keep their national carriers afloat. No one is thinking about expansion. No one is thinking about profits. Airlines are focused on survival. And without drastic financial interventions, many airlines, most airlines, in fact, will not survive. Fiji Airways was an award-winning carrier with steady growth in passengers and revenue over the past 5 years. But no airline can lean on its pre-pandemic success to weather this storm. Look no further than our neighbourhood. Last week, the New Zealand government stepped in to prop up Air New Zealand with a 2-year loan of up to 900 million New Zealand dollars, direct taxpayers' funds. Upon announcement of the loan, the New Zealand Finance Minister said, and I quote, "Without this intervention, Air New Zealand, or New Zealand in fact, was at risk of not having a national carrier," unquote. Around the world, that same recognition is obvious to every government and every opposition, with even an ounce of strategic nous, as this historic crisis has been, met with historic levels of support. A. Finnair received a government guarantee of a loan of euro 600 million. B. SAS Scandinavian received from the governments of Sweden and Denmark a guaranteed loan of US $300 million. Air France KLM received a government guarantee of a loan of euro $4 billion, plus a government loan of 3 billion euros. Lufthansa received the government loans of euro $9 billion. And Korean Air and Asiana Airlines have been granted bailout aid worth US $2.35 billion from state-backed lenders. And US carriers like American Airlines, Delta, United Airlines and others shared a USD $25 billion bailout from the US federal government, which has also made an extra US $30 billion available in unsecured loans and tax breaks. With Fiji Airways fleet mostly grounded and monthly fixed costs needing to be paid, Mr. Speaker, sir, we stepped in to save our carrier. Following necessary parliamentary approval, government granted guarantees to Fiji Airways in the sum of 455 million Fijian dollars. When we presented the package to Parliament, all the financials were clearly laid out. The motion was approved unanimously. For one brief moment, it appeared we had bipartisan commitment to the future of our carrier and the future of our country at a time when unity was clearly the best option available to us. But what has happened since then, Mr. Speaker, sir? Several members of the opposition and a few self-appointed aviation experts outside of this chamber have pulled a complete 180 degrees. They're backtracking on their support to our airline, choosing instead to undermine it by taking potshots through the rag newspaper. Now Fiji's national carrier is the only airline on the planet forced to contend with two crises, a pandemic overseas and an all-out campaign of devious lies led by opposition politicians. It is malicious. It is unpatriotic, Mr. Speaker, sir. It is unforgivable. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, sir, it should never be forgotten. Mr. Speaker, sir, we've seen absurd allegations about Wangavuka Financing Limited, a company whose purpose we clearly explained numerous times, including back in February. You can Google it. There are articles dating back 7 years ago explaining what this company is and what purpose it serves. We have Honorable Bhiman Prasad asking for Fiji Airways financials. If he bothered to scrounge up $10.90, he could easily obtain Fiji Airways financial statements dating back to his date of incorporation as required by the Companies Act. Opposition supporters are demanding to know how we are able to share profits with Fiji Airways staff when the fleet is currently grounded. Of course, those were last year's profits, had anyone actually bothered to check financial year Jan to December. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have politicians claiming our carrier is technically insolvent and bankrupt. Both wrong. If it was, it would not be able to access outside financing, which it has. Honorable Prasad has said that because the company has deferred loan repayments, it is technically insolvent. As I've explained to Honorable Prasad, many companies, including some large companies that he is familiar with, we are familiar with, have deferred loan repayments. They no longer have a cash flow. If they're operating proud, they're operating tapus, the sales are down, a lot of companies. They go to the bank and say, please defer my principal repayments. Does not mean they're technically insolvent. That does not mean, Mr. Speaker, sir, that they're technically insolvent. Of course, if your source of revenue is withered away, cash flow will be affected. That does not mean, again, you're insolvent. In fact, Prouds and Tapus at the airport, because they get duty-free access to all these goods, for example, chocolates, they said we no longer can sell because nobody's coming through. Can you make it duty-free for us if you sold it within Fiji? We agreed to that. Does that mean they're technically insolvent? Mr. Speaker, sir, we even have some people claiming that Fiji Airways was overly expensive and overly ambitious in the lead up to its unpredictable pandemic. But they were quiet when they saw the new A350s arrive. They were quiet when we reopened Japan, when we went to Singapore, when we increased the flights to San Francisco, scheduled flights. Those new routes and acquisitions added new jobs for pilots, flight attendants, caterers, ATS workers, more catering required. They brought more tourists and more revenue into the country. The truth is, due to competition from Qantas on its bread and butter routes, the airline intended to invest in its competitiveness to seize a greater share of our traditional markets and open flows of new arrivals from the other parts of the world. Otherwise, COVID or not, its viability could be in jeopardy. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I want those who spent the past few weeks attacking Fiji Airways to take a good look at themselves in the mirror and ask, why are we doing this? They should ask, why are we undermining a Fijian company so critical to our economic comeback? And who possibly gains from our attacks? Mr. Speaker, sir, right now we should be a united front, ready to defend our carrier through thick and thin. We should all be doing everything possible to protect the future jobs it will bring back and the future activity it will generate for our economy. Mr. Speaker, sir, I want those attacking our airline, our national airline, to put their egos aside and imagine a Fiji without Fiji Airways, with air travel into and out of Fiji at the mercy of a foreign carrier. Fares to get in and out of Fiji would shoot through the roof. We have no control. We depend entirely on overseas airlines who may only run regular routes in the peak season. Unlike Fiji Airways, which operates on a daily basis, generating much needed foreign exchange. Mr. Speaker, sir, Fiji would not see a cent of that foreign exchange should we see the demise of Fiji Airways. All of that economic activity would be shipped offshore. The crew of every flight would be foreign, taking jobs from our people. The catering would be done overseas, no more ATS catering. The engineering would occur overseas, shipping ATS jobs offshore, along with every ancillary business to the airline industry. As we highlighted the other day, there are many people who actually live off the industry, even in the informal sector. Farmers, Fijian farmers who supply vegetables, Yangon, LA, San Francisco, Sydney, Brisbane, they would potentially lose out the market because they would be beholden to a foreign carrier. Our farmers who export root crops overseas on a weekly basis, some of them 2-3 times a week, would be subject to the whims of a foreign company. Mr. Speaker, it's clear some of the members on the opposite side have not thought any of this through. They can barely see past their own noses, much less through to the next month or next year. They won't see the suffering that will come from our national carrier going under until that very moment is upon us. But some of our critics know exactly what they're doing. They're looking past this crisis all the way to 2022. They're intentionally being hypocrites. And their sights are set on crippling our career, crippling our recovery, and crippling our economy. Also, they can point the finger at government in the next elections. One of these dishonest hypocrites used to serve as a minister for finance, and indeed at once was the Prime Minister of Fiji. In 2008, that year actually, he claimed Fiji Airways was overly, I must say this. Now he's claiming that Fiji Airways was overly ambitious pre-COVID. But 12 years ago, he was singing to a very different tune as he called on the then Air Pacific to modernize its fleet, explore new destinations. In his own words from a press release stated on 27 May 2008, some of you are now singing the same mantra of Mahendra Chaudhry. He says, and I quote, he said then, Air Pacific is a stagnating airline. Its profit is declining. It is not expanding. No new major international destinations have been added to its flight network in the past 2 decades. He says again, it is ridiculous for anyone to say that as a major shareholder, the Fiji government should sit back and not take timely action to set things right to avert. He then says, as Fiji's flagship carrier, it is expected to contribute to a vibrant tourism industry by exploring expansion into new markets and destinations. But we have not seen the national airline embark on new initiatives in the past 2 decades. All of this, Mr. Speaker, sir, what he claimed then should have been done, actually has been done. But now, Mr. Speaker, sir, when Fiji Airways actually has gone on to realize that objective, he could have never, which he never himself would have implemented, he may be bitter about that. But there's no excuse to start arguing against the very points he made 12 years ago. And some of you are actually now saying the same things. Mr. Speaker, so let's again look at New Zealand. Despite the fact that they're heading into an election next month, I should say, the government's loan to the airline hasn't turned ugly and become some hotly contested political issue. The CEO of Air New Zealand isn't having to defend the airline from being turned into a political football. Lucky for him, he operates in a country where the opposition understands how a globally integrated economy works. Sadly, it's becoming clear we can't say the same for Fiji. And we ask the critics who have spent this global pandemic sniping at Fiji Airways, do you seriously think that Kiwis should be handling things differently? Or is supporting a national carrier only a problem when Fiji does it? Mr. Speaker, sir, while they think on that, every Fijian should be asking why. Only in Fiji does the opposition fight us on doing what must be done to save our national airline. In truth, our people should be more committed to our national carrier than most. We don't live in a country where people can simply hop into a car and drive across the border. We're an island nation. Our national carrier is an essential part of our economic infrastructure. We cannot give such a critical piece of our economy away to foreign interests. Just look at Qantas. They have an interest in Fiji Airways, but they have not contributed a single cent, not a single cent during this crisis. Now we have opposition members seriously saying we should sell to Qantas or bring back Qantas or Air New Zealand. I heard one of the supporters on the other day on social media saying, sell it to Air New Zealand. It's shameful. These people are lackeys for foreign companies with no pride in their carrier or their country and not a shred of foresight. They want to tear down our national carrier, burn down Fiji's one bridge to the rest of the world. Because that is what Fiji Airways means for Fijians. Our bridge to the world. It is how visitors come to us. It is how we visit friends and families and relatives in other countries. It is how our farmers and exporters deliver their goods to foreign markets. It is how many of our citizens have returned to Fiji during this global pandemic. Yes, today the world may be closed, but it won't always be closed. And if we don't support our carrier through this crisis, the world will never open up to us in the same way again. There will be no full recovery for tourism. The jobs will not come back. There will be no future economic comeback. There will be no returning to life as it was. Instead, we will cement ourselves in economic purgatory and leave our children in an economic worse position than what we inherited. Mr. Speaker, sir, no one is doubting the future is uncertain. We'd have better luck forecasting a coin flip than predicting the full return of normalized passenger air travel. It could be months. It could be years. No one knows. But Mr. Speaker, sir, we know without a doubt that when borders reopen, we must be in a position to seize on that opportunity. Until that day arrives, we need support from all quarters to ensure Fiji Airways weathers the present storm. There is plan A, B, and C. There is no alternative. We will continue doing everything possible to see that our national carrier survives, all the way until the day our borders reopen. Today, our commitment to the Fijian carrier and to the Fijian economy demands we defend Fiji Airways, the pride of our people, from the faithless, from those who cannot see further than their own political future. Mr. Speaker, since late February 2020, we've taken steps to reduce costs, preserve cash and bolster the cash reserves with many financing activities to ensure Fiji Airways survives the COVID-19 pandemic and thrives once again when border restrictions actually ease up. Since the execution of government guarantees, Fiji Airways is continuing to take concrete steps to ensure its sustainability. We'll explain some of that today and put a definitive end to the unfounded political speculation on the airline's financial position. The Fiji Airways Group, Mr. Speaker, sir, which includes Fiji Airways, the national carrier, our domestic operator subsidiary Fiji Link, and a 38.75% stake in the Sofitel Fiji Resort, earned a profit before tax for the year ended 31 December 2019 of Fijian $61.2 million in the financial year 2019, compared to Fijian $55.3 million for the previous financial year. In July 2019, Fiji Airways faced a forecasted full-year operating loss of around Fijian $100 million, compared with a full-year operating profit in 2018 of Fijian $50 million. This dramatic decline in forecasted financial results was caused by the impact for the year of further fuel price increases, Fijian $29 million, impact of the stronger US dollar exchange rates on all US dollar costs, Fijian $11 million, and most importantly, the expected negative impacts on profits resulting from Qantas commencing direct flights in direct competition with Fiji Airways from Sydney to Nadi from 31 July 2019, Fijian $65 million. The significance, Mr. Speaker, sir, of turning a full-year forecasted operating loss of Fijian $100 million in 5 months to an operating profit of Fijian $61.2 million is way more than just being profitable. It speaks volumes about Fiji Airways and Fiji Link's leadership and the board. Were it not for Qantas reducing the number of code-share passengers placed on Fiji Airways in 2019 by 99,000 compared to 2018, growth for 2019 would have been actually 8% as opposed to 2%. Mr. Speaker, sir, with the closure of the borders of the core markets, Australia, New Zealand, USA, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and the resultant drop in travel, Fiji Airways suspended all international passenger services from 1 April 2020. That is, grounded 95% of its aircraft fleet. This resulted in the monthly revenue earned dropping to almost zero. While grounding this fleet saves variable operating costs, it still has to pay recurrent fixed costs close to Fijian $38 million per month. Fiji Airways' recurring monthly fixed costs on 1st April 2020 was Fijian $38 million, comprising primarily of aircraft ownership and lease costs of Fijian $24.5 million, employee payroll costs of Fijian $7.5 million, and insurances, property rentals, etc. of Fijian $6 million. The ongoing cost savings and cash preservation initiatives, including aircraft loan and rental payment deferrals, have progressively reduced the monthly recurring fixed costs by August 2020 to around Fijian $20 million until June 2021. Urgent ongoing steps and measures were taken from early March 2020 to save costs and preserve cash. Further steps were implemented regarding employees on 25 March 2020. These include, Mr. Speaker, sir, 1, the early return of leased aircraft. Negotiations are in process with the lessors for the early return of the 2 Airbus A330-200 aircraft, as well as 1 Boeing 737-800 aircraft. Insurance premium adjustment and deferral. As most of the fleet is currently grounded, Fiji Airways has negotiated with the insurers for ground risk cover only because the planes aren't flying, which comes at a discounted rate of 35% at the full all-risk premium. Reduction in deferral of property rentals. Fiji Airways has arranged a deferral of all property rentals until December 2020, including some recurring reductions. You must remember they have actually properties offshore that they are renting. Supplier payment deferrals and reduction in charges. All key suppliers have been requested to agree to payment deferral arrangements, as well as negotiations are in progress for reduction in future fees and charges. and non-essential projects frozen. All non-essential projects have been stopped to prevent future cash outlays. Reduction of employee costs, Mr. Speaker, sir. 8 expatriate executives had their employment terminated, while 5 remaining, including the CEO, with only 5 remaining in the CEO. All 79 expatriate pilots had their contracts terminated. 51% of the employees from across the airline who did not have work on 25 May 2020 had their employment terminated. A 20% permanent salary reduction was implemented for all retained employees from 1 June 2020. Expatriate executives had their salaries reduced by 30%. And last, retained employees are rostered to work between 2 to 5 days per week and are only paid for actual days worked. Fiji Airways in March 2020, Mr. Speaker, sir, prepared a wide range of worst case and best case detailed monthly cash receipts and payment forecasts for the years 2020 until 2027. The management and board have used a worst case as the base case, which assumes no flying until January 2021, with a very slow ramp up to only 70% of past normal by the end of 2021. Fiji Airways' base case of cash forecast for 2020 until 2027 have been independently validated by BNP Paribas. Those of you know in the finance market, BNP Paribas is actually an international merchant bank, a lending international aviation consultancy too, which ADB is actually hired to assess Fiji Airways' cash base to ensure that they are able to lend to a company that actually can pay their loans. The Fijian, Mr. Speaker, sir, $60 million recovery rebate package will provide a further Fiji $400 stipend per passenger for the first 150 passengers who book, travel and stay in Fiji using a holiday package. We are happy that Fiji Airways has agreed to be entrusted to lead and administer the recovery rebate package program, where the stipend will be shared between Fiji Airways and the hotels for the enticing holiday packages developed and sold. Some people have said we should use that money to pay workers. But Mr. Speaker said we're trying to get them employment by actually getting more tourists in. If you are going to simply just do that for unemployment benefit, which you already have $100 million, we will still won't be generating employment. And employment, by generation of employment, it means other people also get employed, not only those who are directly employed by the tourism sector or the airline. Again, Mr. Speaker, so that type of thinking exhibits a fundamental lack of understanding about how the economy works. By supporting tourism, we support actual jobs. That's what we need for our recovery: jobs, economic activity, and investments. Mr. Speaker, so last but not least, I've only got one page left. It has introduced and grown freight flights to 10 a week to Sydney now, to Sydney, Auckland, LA, Hong Kong, and Port Vila, to provide a vital service to our exporters and to bring urgent supplies to Fiji. These freight flights cover variable operating costs with a very small margin. Mr. Speaker, sir, I've received text messages from people exporting yangona and various other agricultural produce saying it's great that Fiji Airways is here because nobody else is actually going to take our yangona to LA. Air New Zealand is going to come specifically to Fiji to take our agricultural produce to LA or San Francisco or Brisbane. Mr. Speaker, sir, Fiji Airways growth, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the past years have been around 8% per year on average. That is the target they've set and announced publicly for years. We've been struggling to understand why the measures we've taken have become so political when the facts are so clear. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Fijian government and the Fijian people stand firmly with Fiji Airways. We will see our national carrier ride out this difficult chapter for the global aviation industry, and that is travel ready to bring back visitors to our shores as soon as our borders open. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.